Stop chasing yes. Seriously, while everyone's desperately avoiding rejection, the top 1% are actively collecting it like rare coins. They know something about the relationship between no and yes. That sounds absolutely insane until you see the proof. Every week, something incredible happens in the world of cartooning. Hundreds of perfectly good jokes get tossed into editorial trash bins. These aren't amateur sketches or terrible punchlines. Many come from seasoned professionals who've been drawing cartoons for decades. The artwork is polished, the jokes are clever, and yet they still get stamped with rejection. The New Yorker alone receives over 500 cartoon submissions every single week. That's roughly 26,000 cartoons flooding their offices each year. Out of this massive pile, only about 20 make it into each weekly issue. Do the math, that's less than a 5% acceptance rate. Even Harvard Medical School has better odds. But here's where it gets interesting. Those rejected cartoons don't just disappear into thin air. Famous cartoonists like Roz Chast, who's been published in the New Yorker for over 30 years, still keeps meticulous records of every single rejection she's received. Her filing system contains thousands of cartoons that never saw print. Each one represents hours of creative work, from initial concept to final inkstroke. Sam Gross, another legendary cartoonist, has accumulated over 12,000 rejections throughout his career. 12,000! That's enough rejected material to wallpaper several houses. And Gross isn't some struggling amateur. He's had hundreds of cartoons published in major magazines. Yet for every cartoon that makes it to print, dozens more join his growing collection of editorial notes. Then there's the weird psychology behind what cartoonists do with these rejects. Most artists can't bring themselves to throw them away. These drawings represent too much creative energy to simply toss in the garbage. Instead, they get filed away in drawers, stored in portfolios, or stacked in corners of home studios. Some cartoonists even frame their favorite rejections and hang them on office walls as badges of honor. The rejection process itself has become an art form. Magazines typically send back submissions with brief, polite form letters. Thanks for your submission, but this doesn't meet our current needs. Sometimes editors scribble personal notes on rejection slips, close but not quite there, or try again with something edgier. These tiny feedback crumbs become treasured guidance for persistent cartoonists. What makes this whole system fascinating is how subjective the selection process really is. A cartoon that gets rejected by the New Yorker might be perfect for Playboy or Mad Magazine. Different publications have different humor styles, different audiences, and different comfort levels with edgy material. One editor's trash truly becomes another editor's treasure. The timing factor plays a huge role too. A cartoon about technology might get rejected in January, but accepted in June when the cultural moment feels right. Political cartoons face even tighter windows. A brilliant joke about current events becomes worthless if submitted a week too late. Editorial calendars, competing content, and pure luck all influence whether a cartoon makes the cut. Many successful cartoonists describe rejection as the foundation of their careers. Every no taught them something about their craft, their audience, or their approach to humor. The feedback loop between submission and rejection becomes a masterclass in commercial comedy. Artists learn to read between the lines of editorial preferences and adjust their work accordingly. But something unexpected has started happening with all these rejected cartoons. Editors and cartoonists began realizing that some of their best work was hiding in rejection piles. Jokes that were deemed too weird or too risky for mainstream magazines were often the most creative and boundary-pushing material these artists had produced. Collections of rejected work started appearing at cartoonist gatherings and industry events. Artists would share their favorite unpublished pieces, often getting bigger laughs than their published material received. The rejected cartoons had a raw, unfiltered quality that resonated with audiences hungry for humor that pushed boundaries. This underground appreciation for rejected material created an interesting paradox. Cartoons that weren't good enough for publication were becoming more popular than the ones that actually made it to print. The rejects had personality, edge, and creative risk-taking that editorial constraints had filtered out of mainstream magazines. The sheer volume of quality rejected material sitting in filing cabinets and portfolios across the country represented an untapped goldmine of comedy. Thousands of professional quality cartoons were gathering dust, unseen by audiences who would probably love them. These weren't failed experiments or artistic mistakes. They were polished, clever, and often hilarious pieces of work that simply didn't fit editorial formulas. What started as individual cartoonists hoarding their rejections evolved into a recognition that this hidden world of rejected humor deserved its own spotlight. The question wasn't whether these cartoons were funny enough to publish, clearly they were. The real question was finding the right venue brave enough to celebrate the jokes that mainstream editors deemed too risky, too strange, or simply too much for their audiences. Understanding why these perfectly good cartoons get rejected in the first place reveals the fascinating tensions between creative expression and commercial publishing. Most cartoon rejections happen for one simple reason: the joke crossed a line somewhere. But here's where it gets interesting. That line isn't always where you'd expect it to be. Take The New Yorker, for example. They'll reject a cartoon about death, but publish one about divorce. They'll pass on a joke about politics, but greenlight something about existential dread. The boundaries seem random until you realize what's really happening. Editors aren't just looking at whether something's funny, they're asking whether their readers will still be laughing tomorrow morning. The too strange pile grows massive every week. Cartoonists submit drawings of talking furniture, philosophical conversations between household objects, and surreal scenarios that make perfect sense in their heads but leave editors scratching theirs. One famous cartoonist once submitted a cartoon showing two fish discussing quantum physics while swimming through a living room. Hilarious? Maybe. Too weird for most magazines? Absolutely. Then there's the darkness factor. Comedy has always danced with dark subjects, but magazines walk a tightrope between edgy and offensive. A cartoon about someone's bad day at work might sail through, while one about someone's existential crisis gets stamped with rejection. The difference often comes down to how many readers will chuckle versus how many will cancel their subscriptions. But wait, it gets more complicated. Sometimes perfectly clean, perfectly normal jokes get rejected simply because they're too risky for the brand. Magazine editors spend sleepless nights wondering if a cartoon will spark angry letters or social media storms. An innocent joke about modern technology might get the boot if there's even a tiny chance someone could misinterpret it. Better safe than sorry becomes the unofficial motto. Office politics play a bigger role than most people realize. When editors sit around the conference table each week, personal preferences clash with business decisions. One editor might love a cartoon while another thinks it's terrible. Sometimes the best jokes lose out because they remind someone of their ex-husband or their annoying neighbor. Human nature doesn't disappear just because you're picking cartoons for publication. Here's something that'll surprise you: even brilliant original ideas get rejected if they're too similar to something published months or years ago. Magazines keep detailed records of every cartoon they've ever run. Submit a joke about cats being judgmental, and they'll remember they published something similar in 1987. Your cartoon might be 10 times funnier, but similarity equals rejection in most editorial offices. The out there category deserves special mention. These are cartoons that exist in their own universe of weird. Picture a drawing showing aliens confused by human customs or office workers having deep philosophical debates about staplers. They're creative, they're original, and they're absolutely unmarketable to mainstream audiences. Editors appreciate the artistry, but know their readers expect certain types of humor. Timing kills more good cartoons than bad writing ever could. Submit a joke about summer vacation in December and watch it disappear into the rejection pile. Current events create another minefield. Reference something too recent, and it'll be old news by publication time. Reference something too old, and readers won't get it. The sweet spot is incredibly narrow. Some rejections happen because the cartoon requires too much explanation. The best published cartoons hit you immediately. You see it, you get it, you laugh. But rejected ones often need backstory or cultural knowledge that not everyone possesses. An inside joke might be hilarious to certain people, but completely meaningless to everyone else. Editors choose clarity over cleverness almost every time. Commercial considerations lurk behind many rejections too. Cartoons that might offend advertisers get rejected faster than stale coffee. Make fun of technology companies when tech ads pay the bills. Not happening. Mock lifestyle trends when lifestyle brands sponsor your magazine. Keep dreaming. The strangest part: sometimes cartoons get rejected, not because they're bad, but because they're too good in the wrong way. A cartoon might be absolutely hilarious, but completely wrong for the magazine's tone. It's like wearing a tuxedo to a beach party. Neat is technically impressive, but totally inappropriate for the setting. Quality doesn't guarantee acceptance either. Editors receive technically perfect cartoons with sharp artwork and clever writing that still end up rejected. The art might be museum-worthy. The joke might be perfectly constructed, but something indefinable just doesn't click with the publication's needs. Weather, personal moods, and even what editors had for lunch can influence decisions. These are human beings making subjective choices about humor. Possibly the most subjective thing in existence. What seems hilarious on a sunny Tuesday might feel flat on a rainy Friday. All these rejected cartoons pile up in filing cabinets and computer folders, creating mountains of unseen humor. But here's what makes this story really interesting. The people creating all these rejected masterpieces aren't giving up. They keep drawing, keep submitting, and keep building impressive collections of their unwanted work. The creators behind these rejections have stories worth hearing, and their persistence might just surprise you. Behind every stack of rejected cartoons sits a real person with a drawing tablet and probably too much caffeine. These aren't failed artists or weekend hobbyists. We're talking about professionals who make their living with ink and ideas. Take Roz Chast, one of the most beloved cartoonists in America. Her quirky, neurotic drawings have graced The New Yorker for decades. But here's what most people don't know. She gets rejected constantly. Even after winning awards and publishing books, editors still say no to her work week after week, batch after batch. The woman who perfectly captures modern anxiety can't escape the anxiety of waiting for that editorial response. Then there's Sam Gross, whose dark humor has twisted readers' minds for years. This guy has submitted thousands of cartoons over his career. Thousands. And yeah, many of them got the dreaded rejection slip. But Sam keeps detailed records of every single submission. He's got filing cabinets full of thanks, but no thanks letters. Makes you wonder if he's more organized about his failures than his successes. The weekly grind never stops for working cartoonists. Every Tuesday, like clockwork, dozens of artists fire off their latest batch to the New Yorker's cartoon editor. 10 ideas here, 15 there. Some cartoonists treat it like a numbers game, throw enough darts at the board, and eventually you'll hit something. Others agonize over every single submission, crafting each joke like a tiny masterpiece. But here's where it gets interesting. Many of these creators have started keeping their own greatest hits collections of rejected work. Not the stuff that bombed completely. The cartoons they genuinely love that just couldn't find a home. These are the jokes that make them laugh out loud while drawing, the ones their friends crack up over, the ideas that feel too good to just shove in a drawer. David Cypress, another New Yorker regular, once admitted he has boxes of rejected cartoons under his bed. Literally under his bed. Like some kind of comedy time capsule waiting to be discovered, he pulls them out sometimes, looks through them, and thinks, why didn't this work? Half the time, he still can't figure it out. What's fascinating is how these artists handle the psychological warfare of constant rejection. Most develop thick skin pretty quickly, but they also develop something else, a strange appreciation for their rejected work. It's like having a secret collection nobody else gets to see. The weird part is that many cartoonists claim their rejected stuff is sometimes funnier than what actually gets published. Matthew Duffy, who later became the New Yorker's cartoon editor, started collecting rejected cartoons from his fellow artists long before he had any official role. He'd ask other cartoonists to share their favorite rejects, not just any rejects, the good ones that got away. The responses surprised him. These weren't bitter artists complaining about unfair treatment. They were proud of their rejected work. Some cartoonists even throw rejection parties where they share their latest batch of no's with friends. Imagine that dinner party conversation. Instead of showing off vacation photos, you're flipping through cartoons that professional editors deemed unfit for publication. The laughter in those rooms is probably louder than in most comedy clubs. The community aspect runs deeper than you'd expect. Cartoonists trade rejection stories like war veterans comparing battle scars. There's an unspoken understanding that if you're not getting rejected regularly, you're probably not pushing boundaries hard enough. The artists who never get rejected, they're either incredibly lucky or playing it way too safe. Leo Cullum, who passed away in 2010, left behind over 2,000 published cartoons in The New Yorker. Sounds impressive until you learn he submitted roughly 15,000 ideas over his career. That's more than 13,000 rejections from one magazine alone. He kept submitting to other publications too, racking up rejections like frequent flyer miles. Working cartoonists don't just submit and forget, they study their rejections, looking for patterns. Was it too dark? Too obscure? Did it hit too close to current events? Some keep spreadsheets tracking which types of jokes get rejected most often. It's like being a scientist studying the anatomy of no. The weird psychology of it all creates this underground culture of celebrated failure. Artists who've never met in person bond over shared rejection experiences. Online forums buzz with discussions about the best cartoons that never saw print. There's almost a sense of pride in having quality work that was too good for mainstream publication. But what happens when someone actually starts collecting these cast-offs and giving them a second chance? Well, that's where rejected cartoons get their moment to shine, proving that sometimes the best jokes are the ones editors were too scared to print. What happens when someone decides that all those discarded cartoon gems deserve better than gathering dust and filing cabinets? Matthew Duffy had exactly that thought when he started collecting rejected New Yorker cartoons. This former cartoon editor turned rescuer into something of a cartoon archaeologist, digging through piles of no-thank-you submissions to find the hidden treasures that editors had passed over. Duffy wasn't just randomly grabbing rejected cartoons from trash bins. He had an eye for quality and knew which jokes were genuinely funny, but simply didn't fit the magazine's current needs. The guy spent years working with the New Yorker, so he understood both sides of the equation perfectly. He knew what made editors say no, and more importantly, he could spot the diamonds in the rough that deserved a second chance. Then there's the fascinating world of cartoonists who become their own archivists. Roz Chast, one of the most successful New Yorker cartoonists, keeps detailed records of her rejected work. She doesn't just throw them away and forget about them. Instead, she carefully stores each rejected cartoon, sometimes for decades, knowing that what doesn't work today might be perfect tomorrow. Many cartoonists have entire filing systems dedicated to their rejects. Some organize them by theme, others by year, and a few even rank them by how close they came to being accepted. It's like maintaining a museum of almosts. These artists understand something crucial about the creative process. Rejection doesn't equal worthless. But here's where things get really interesting. Sometimes a cartoon rejected by one magazine becomes a hit somewhere else entirely. The humor industry isn't monolithic, and different publications have completely different audiences and standards. What's too edgy for a family magazine might be perfect for an alternative weekly. What's too silly for a sophisticated publication could be exactly what a humor website needs. Duffy recognized this pattern and decided to do something unprecedented with it. He created the Rejection collection, giving new life to cartoons that had been deemed not quite right for the New Yorker. This wasn't just a random compilation of failed jokes, it was a carefully curated collection that proved rejected didn't mean bad. The weird part is how many cartoonists were thrilled to participate. You'd think artists might be embarrassed to showcase their rejected work, but the opposite happened. They were eager to share their favorites that never made it to print. Many had been sitting on jokes they personally loved but couldn't place anywhere. Some cartoonists discovered that their rejected cartoons were actually more representative of their true voice than their published work. When you're not trying to fit into a magazine's specific style, you can let your personality shine through more freely. The result? Cartoons that felt more authentic and often funnier than their polished, accepted counterparts. Let's not forget how digital platforms changed this entire dynamic. Before the internet, a rejected cartoon was essentially dead unless another print magazine picked it up. Now cartoonists can share their rejects on social media, personal websites, or online galleries. What couldn't find a home in traditional publishing suddenly has unlimited venues. The success of Rejection collections proved something publishers hadn't expected. Readers were genuinely curious about what didn't make the cut. There's something deliciously rebellious about seeing the cartoons that were deemed too weird, too dark, or too unconventional for mainstream publication. It's like getting access to the director's cut of comedy. Webcomics emerged as another lifeline for rejected material. Cartoonists started posting their magazine rejects online and found dedicated audiences who preferred the unfiltered humor. These platforms don't have the same constraints as print magazines, so they can accommodate stranger, more experimental comedy. Some rejected cartoons actually gained more fame than many published ones. When a cartoon goes viral online after being rejected by a magazine, it creates this beautiful irony where the failure becomes more successful than many successes. The rejection almost becomes part of the cartoon's origin story, making it more appealing to audiences who love underdog narratives. Publishers began to notice this trend and started being more adventurous with their selections. When they saw rejected material thriving elsewhere, it made them question whether they were being too conservative in their choices. The success of alternative venues created pressure on traditional publications to expand their boundaries. The collecting and republishing of rejected cartoons created an entirely new market. Readers who exhausted all the mainstream cartoon collections could now dive into curated rejection compilations. It was like discovering a parallel universe of humor that had been hidden from public view. Artists started viewing their rejection piles differently too. Instead of seeing them as failures to be forgotten, they began treating them as potential treasures waiting for the right moment or venue. This shift in perspective completely changed how cartoonists approach their creative process and their relationship with editorial feedback. While rejection collections give discarded cartoons new life, there's an even bigger picture worth considering about what all these no responses actually teach us about creativity and growth. Getting rejected hurts. Nobody likes hearing no when they've poured their heart into creating something. But here's what most people don't realize about rejection in the cartoon world. It's actually one of the most valuable tools an artist can have. Those painful no's aren't just dead ends. They're roadmaps. Matthew Duffy learned this the hard way, during his early years submitting to The New Yorker. Week after week, his cartoons came back with polite rejection slips. Each one stung a little less than the last, but something interesting started happening. He began noticing patterns in what got rejected and what occasionally squeaked through. The editors weren't just saying no randomly, they were teaching him something without even knowing it. Every rejection tells a story about the market. When a cartoon gets turned down for being too edgy, that's valuable information. When it's rejected for being too similar to something we ran last month, that's a lesson in timing and originality. Smart cartoonists keep track of these reasons like scientists collecting data. Roz Chast, one of the New Yorker's most beloved cartoonists, has said that her rejected cartoons taught her more about her own voice than her published ones ever did. Makes sense, right? When something gets accepted, you know it worked, but you might not know exactly why. When something gets rejected, you're forced to dig deeper and figure out what went wrong. The best part about rejection is how it pushes artists to take bigger creative risks. Sam Gross, whose cartoons often walk the line between brilliant and bizarre, credits his early rejections with forcing him to develop his unique style. He couldn't compete by playing it safe, so he went weird instead. Those initial no's became the foundation for a career built on being gloriously unpredictable. Then there's the persistence factor. Most successful cartoonists have rejection stories that sound almost mythical. One artist submitted the same cartoon to The New Yorker 17 times over 3 years, with tiny modifications each time. The 18th version finally got accepted. Was it really that different from the first attempt? Probably not. But the artist had learned something crucial during those 17 rejections: patience and the willingness to keep refining an idea until it found its moment. But rejection doesn't just teach technical lessons, it builds creative resilience in ways that success never could. When you've been rejected hundreds of times, getting one more no doesn't feel like the end of the world. It feels like Tuesday. This emotional toughness becomes crucial when artists need to experiment with controversial or unconventional ideas. The weird part is how rejection can actually improve the quality of accepted work. Cartoonists who've been through the rejection mill tend to self-edit more effectively. They develop an internal sense of what might work and what probably won't. This doesn't mean they play it safe. It means they take smarter risks. Consider the case of cartoons that were initially rejected but later became classics elsewhere. Some of Gary Larson's early Far Side concepts were turned down by traditional magazine editors who found them too strange. Those rejections pushed him towards syndication, where his weird sense of humor found the perfect audience. The initial no's weren't failures. They were course corrections guiding him toward his true calling. Major publishing houses have started recognizing this phenomenon. When they scout for new talent, they sometimes look specifically at artists' rejected work. There's something raw and unfiltered about rejected cartoons that reveals an artist's true voice, stripped of commercial considerations and editorial compromises. Even the process of organizing and reviewing rejected work can spark new creative directions. Many cartoonists report discovering forgotten gems while sorting through old rejection piles. A cartoon that didn't work 5 years ago might be perfect for today's cultural moment. Rejection becomes a form of time-delayed opportunity. The most successful cartoonists treat rejection like feedback from an unpaid consultant. Each no contains information about audience expectations, market timing, and creative boundaries. The artists who thrive are the ones who learn to decode these messages and use them to sharpen their comedic instincts. What makes this even more interesting is how rejection builds community among creators. Cartoonists bond over their shared experiences of editorial disappointment. They trade rejection stories like war veterans sharing battle tales. This camaraderie often leads to collaborative projects and mutual support networks that wouldn't exist otherwise. Smart artists eventually learn to celebrate certain types of rejection. When a cartoon gets rejected for being too bold or pushing boundaries, that might actually be a compliment in disguise. It suggests the work has real impact and isn't just playing it safe. The most valuable rejections are often the ones that hurt the most initially. They force artists to confront uncomfortable truths about their work and push them toward genuine growth. But here's what happens when artists stop seeing rejection as a dead end and start treating it as fuel for bigger, bolder ideas. When magazines reject cartoons, they're usually playing it safe. But what happens when you take away all those careful editorial boundaries? Well, you get comedy that's raw, unfiltered, and sometimes absolutely bonkers. The rejected cartoons in collections like the Rejection collection don't hold back. They dive headfirst into territory that would make most editors break out in cold sweats. Dark humor about death, check. Jokes that poke fun at religion, politics, or social taboos, double check. Cartoons so weird they make you question reality itself, triple check with a cherry on top. Take this example from the collection, a cartoon showing a man at a confessional booth, but instead of talking to a priest, he's confessing to a vending machine. The caption reads something like, "Forgive me, Father, for I have snacked." It's silly, it borders on sacrilegious, and it's exactly the kind of thing that would never make it past a mainstream magazine's editorial team. But readers absolutely love it. Then there's the really dark stuff. Cartoons about death, divorce, and depression that make you laugh and feel slightly guilty about it at the same time. One rejected cartoon shows the Grim Reaper standing at someone's door holding a clipboard, saying, "Sorry, I'm actually here for your Wi-Fi password." It's morbid, it's modern, and it's hilariously inappropriate for a family-friendly publication. The weird part is how these boundary-pushing jokes often resonate more deeply with people than the sanitized versions that make it to print. When cartoonists aren't worried about offending someone's grandmother or getting angry letters from concerned citizens, they tap into something more honest. More human, maybe? Some of these rejected cartoons tackle subjects that polite society prefers to whisper about. Mental health, awkward social situations, the absurdity of modern life, all fair game when there's no editorial filter standing guard. A cartoon might show a therapist's office where the couch is literally a hot dog bun, and the patient is an actual hot dog discussing his fear of mustard. Absurd? Absolutely. But it somehow captures the ridiculousness of therapy culture in a way that a more conventional cartoon never could. Let's not forget the political landmines that rejected cartoons happily dance through. While published cartoons often stick to safe, broadly appealing political humor, the rejects go full throttle. They mock politicians from all sides, skewer social movements, and generally treat nothing as sacred. The result is comedy that's more honest, even if it's also more likely to ruffle feathers. But here's where things get really interesting. Fans actively seek out this unfiltered content. They're tired of jokes that have been focus grouped to death and sanitized for mass consumption. When the Rejection collection hit bookstores, people didn't just buy it, they devoured it. They passed it around to friends with warnings like, "Don't read this in public unless you want strange looks." The success of these collections proves something important about humor. People crave authenticity even when it makes them uncomfortable. Maybe especially when it makes them uncomfortable. The cartoons that get rejected for being too much often end up being the ones that stick in your memory long after you've forgotten the safe, published versions. Social media has only amplified this trend. Cartoonists now share their rejected work directly with audiences, bypassing traditional gatekeepers entirely. A cartoon deemed too risque for The New Yorker might get thousands of shares on Twitter or Instagram. The very qualities that made it unpublishable, its edge, its willingness to push boundaries, become its greatest strengths in the digital Wild West. And the weird part is how these inappropriate cartoons often tackle serious subjects more effectively than their sanitized counterparts. A rejected cartoon about depression might use dark humor to capture something true about mental illness that a more careful, sensitive approach would miss entirely. Sometimes you need to break the rules to tell the truth. The artists themselves often prefer their rejected work. It represents their uncompromised vision, their willingness to take creative risks. When Roz Chast or other established cartoonists share their favorite rejects, there's a gleam in their eye. These are the cartoons they really wanted to draw, before considerations of marketability and appropriateness crept in. This unfiltered approach to humor doesn't just entertain, it pushes the entire medium forward. Today's taboo becomes tomorrow's mainstream. Jokes that seem too edgy now might be perfectly acceptable in a few years, partly because rejected cartoons help normalize them by existing in the margins. The boundary pushers create space for everyone else to be a little bolder, a little more honest, a little more willing to take creative risks. But what do the actual numbers tell us about this whole rejection game? Here's what happens when you turn rejection into pure mathematics. The numbers behind cartoon rejection aren't just statistics, they're a masterclass in perseverance that would make any mathematician weep. Matthew Duffy discovered something incredible while digging through rejection files. Over 95,000 copies of rejection collections have been printed and sold. People aren't just buying these books out of pity. They're hungry for the stuff that didn't make the cut. The stuff editors said was too weird, too bold, or too much. Makes sense, right? But that's just the beginning of this numerical nightmare. Some cartoonists have accumulated over 12,000 rejections each. 12,000, that's not a typo. Roz Chast, one of the New Yorker's most beloved cartoonists, has a filing system that could rival the Library of Congress, except it's filled entirely with artwork that got shot down. She keeps every single rejection slip, every cartoon that didn't make it, every idea that an editor deemed unworthy. The weekly grind tells an even more brutal story. Most magazine editors select just 20 cartoons from 500 weekly submissions. 20 out of 500. Those aren't lottery odds. They're worse. The Powerball might actually give you better chances of winning than getting your cartoon published in a major magazine. Then there's the overall landscape, which is absolutely merciless. Around 90% of submitted jokes never appear in print anywhere. Not in the New Yorker. Not in small magazines. Not even in local newsletters. They just vanish into the void of editorial rejection, collecting dust in artist studios or buried in computer files that nobody will ever open again. What's fascinating is how these numbers create their own ecosystem. Charlie Hankin, a regular contributor to The New Yorker, estimates he's been rejected over 8,000 times. But here's the weird part. He considers that a badge of honor. Each rejection represents an attempt, a swing at the plate, a chance taken. Most people would quit after 50 rejections. These cartoonists treat 8,000 like a warm-up. The math gets even more interesting when you break it down by individual artists. Some cartoonists submit 15 to 20 cartoons every single week. That's roughly 1,000 submissions per year. If their acceptance rate hits 5%, which is considered successful, they're looking at maybe 50 published cartoons annually. The other 950? Straight to the rejection pile. Let's not forget the financial mathematics involved here. Creating a single cartoon might take anywhere from 1 to 3 hours. Multiply that by thousands of rejections, and you're looking at years of unpaid work. Years of drawing, writing, refining, and submitting material that will never earn a dime. Yet cartoonists keep doing it because those rare acceptances make everything worthwhile. Bob Mankoff, former cartoon editor at The New Yorker, revealed that during his tenure, the magazine received approximately 1,000 cartoon submissions every week. From those 1,000, maybe 15 would make it to print. The other 985 cartoonists got form letters thanking them for their submission and encouraging them to try again. Most do. The rejection collections themselves reveal another layer of mathematics. When the rejection collection was first published, it contained 293 cartoons from 30 different artists. That represents just a tiny fraction of their combined rejections. Editor Matthew Duffy had to choose the cream of the crop from literally tens of thousands of rejected cartoons. Even the rejects were getting rejected. Some artists have developed elaborate tracking systems to manage these numbers. Drew Dernovich keeps spreadsheets documenting every submission, every rejection, every acceptance. His data spans over a decade and includes rejection rates by season, editor preferences, and topic success rates. He's turned cartoon submission into a science experiment with himself as the lab rat. The persistence required to survive these numbers borders on insanity. PCV has been submitting cartoons for over 30 years. His rejection count exceeds 15,000, but he's also had hundreds of cartoons published, earning enough to make a living doing what he loves. The math works, but only for those crazy enough to play the long game. What makes these statistics even more remarkable is that they're not discouraging new cartoonists, they're inspiring them. Young artists see these numbers and think, well, if they can survive 12,000 rejections, I can handle a few hundred. It's become a rite of passage, a necessary suffering that proves dedication to the craft. The numbers don't lie, but they also don't tell the complete story. Behind every rejection statistic is a human being who decided to pick up a pen again tomorrow, who chose to draw another cartoon despite knowing the odds, who transformed mathematical impossibility into creative fuel. But here's where the story gets really interesting. What happens when these rejected cartoons find new life beyond traditional publishing? The digital age has created entirely new possibilities for cartoon success. What happens when a cartoonist gets their 1,000th rejection? Most people would assume they'd give up, maybe switch careers, perhaps become an accountant. But here's the twist that nobody talks about. Those rejections become the greatest teacher they never asked for. Take Sam Gross, who collected over 3,000 rejections during his career. Instead of wallowing, he started keeping detailed notes about why each cartoon failed. Was the joke too obvious? Did the timing feel off? Was the drawing style wrong for that particular editor? Each no became a data point in his personal comedy laboratory. The weird part is, this obsessive tracking actually made him funnier. Rejection teaches artists something no art school can. What doesn't work in the real world? When the New Yorker passes on your cartoon about a penguin therapist, you learn that maybe animal psychology isn't their thing. When 3 different magazines reject your office humor, you discover that workplace jokes might be oversaturated. It's like having a focus group of one very picky person telling you exactly where your comedy falls flat. But the learning goes deeper than just this joke bombed. Matthew Duffy noticed something fascinating while collecting rejected cartoons. The artists who bounced back fastest weren't necessarily the most talented ones. They were the ones who treated each rejection like a puzzle to solve rather than a personal attack on their creativity. Let's not forget how rejection creates unexpected comedy trends. Remember when dark humor was considered too risky for mainstream magazines? Those 2 dark rejected cartoons found their way into underground publications, building an audience hungry for edgier content. Eventually, mainstream editors noticed readers craving something with more bite. What started as rejected material became the foundation for an entire comedy movement. Then there's the community aspect that nobody sees coming. Cartoonists began sharing their favorite rejections at industry gatherings, turning failure into bonding experiences. These informal rejection parties became breeding grounds for new ideas. Artists would workshop their failed concepts, getting feedback from peers who understood the sting of editorial dismissal. Makes sense, right? Who better to help fix a broken joke than someone who's broken thousands of them? The digital age changed everything about learning from rejection. Cartoonists started posting their almost on social media, discovering that audiences often loved the rejects more than the published work. Jack Ziegler found that his rejected cartoons got more engagement online than his New Yorker pieces got in print. Readers would comment with suggestions, creating an interactive workshop that traditional publishing never allowed. Well, here's where it gets really interesting. Some artists began deliberately pushing boundaries in their submissions, knowing they'd get rejected, but using those rejections to map the edges of what's acceptable. It became a strategic game of testing limits. Submit something slightly controversial, get rejected, then dial it back just enough to make it publishable while keeping the edge that makes it memorable. The most successful cartoonists developed what insiders call rejection resilience. Instead of seeing no as a dead end, they view it as redirection. Roz Chast describes rejection as getting kicked out of one party only to find there's a better party next door. Her rejected New Yorker cartoons often found homes in other publications where they felt like perfect fits rather than awkward guests. But why does this process work so well for developing comedic instincts? Rejection forces artists to examine their work from multiple angles. They start asking, is this funny to me or funny to everyone? Am I being clever or just showing off? Does this joke serve a purpose or just fill space? These questions sharpen comedic judgment in ways that easy acceptance never could. The numbers tell a surprising story about persistence and learning. Artists who submit regularly for 5 years, regardless of rejection rates, show measurably better joke construction than those who submit sporadically. It's like developing comedic muscle memory through repetition and feedback, even harsh feedback. And the weird part is how rejection can liberate creativity. Once you've been rejected for everything from mild puns to elaborate visual gags, you stop worrying about safe choices. You start taking creative risks because you've already experienced the worst-case scenario, someone saying no. That freedom often leads to breakthrough work that wouldn't exist without the rejection training wheels. Some cartoonists now frame their first rejection letters alongside their first acceptance letters, not as a before and after story, but as proof that both success and failure contributed equally to their development. Each rejection taught them something about timing, audience, or craft that pure success never could have revealed. The learning never stops, either. Veteran cartoonists with decades of published work still study their rejections, looking for patterns and opportunities for growth. They've discovered that even at the top of their game, there's always something new to learn from the jokes that don't make the cut. This relationship between rejection and learning has created something unexpected in the cartoon world, a culture where failure isn't feared but embraced as an essential part of the creative process. But what happens when these hard-earned lessons meet the changing landscape of publishing itself? The magazine world isn't the only game in town anymore. While the New Yorker might pass on a cartoon about zombie accountants or existential dread at Starbucks, dozens of other places are practically begging for that exact kind of weirdness. Webcomics exploded over the past decade, and guess what they're hungry for? The strange stuff. The dark humor. The jokes that make traditional editors nervous. A cartoonist named Sarah Anderson got rejected by mainstream publications for years. Her comics about social anxiety and millennial struggles were too niche for print magazines. Then she started posting them online as Sarah's Scribbles. Now she has millions of followers and multiple book deals. Digital platforms changed everything. Instagram, Twitter, Reddit, they don't have editorial committees sitting around worried about offending suburban readers. The weird part is that these rejected styles often perform better online than safe, sanitized magazine humor. Audiences crave authenticity, even if it's messy or uncomfortable. Then there's the indie magazine scene. Publications like McSweeney's, The Believer, and dozens of smaller humor magazines actively seek out the stuff bigger publications won't touch. They want the cartoons that push boundaries. Makes sense, right? Their readers aren't looking for the same polished jokes they can find everywhere else. But here's where it gets really interesting. Some cartoons that seem too much for traditional venues end up going viral when they find the right platform. Remember those dark New Yorker rejects? Many of them found new life on social media, getting shared thousands of times by people who connected with their unconventional humor. Matthew Duffy discovered this firsthand when he started sharing rejected cartoons online. What editors deemed unpublishable suddenly had audiences laughing and sharing like crazy. One cartoon about a depressed snowman that got rejected by 3 magazines became a hit when posted on Twitter during a winter storm. Timing and platform matter just as much as content. The podcast world opened another door. Comedy podcasts regularly feature cartoonists discussing their rejected work. These conversations often get more attention than the published pieces. Listeners love hearing about the creative process, including the failures. Well, especially the failures. Independent book publishers jumped on this trend too. Beyond the Rejection collection, other publishers started seeking out cartoonists' unused material. Fantagraphics, Drawn and Quarterly, and smaller presses built entire catalogs around work that mainstream outlets passed on. They discovered a hungry audience for unfiltered creative expression. College publications provide another outlet. Student newspapers and magazines often welcome edgy humor that established publications avoid. Young editors take risks that seasoned professionals won't. Many cartoonists credit college publications with giving their unconventional work its first real audience. Online comic platforms like Webtoon and Tapas actively promote diverse styles and subjects. What traditional editors call too experimental becomes innovative in digital spaces. These platforms use algorithms instead of editorial judgment, meaning audience response determines success rather than one person's taste. Local alternative weeklies still exist in many cities, and they're always looking for content that stands out from mainstream fare. The rejected cartoon about hipster zombies, perfect for the local arts paper. The dark joke about corporate life, ideal for the alternative business weekly. Self-publishing became ridiculously easy. Cartoonists can now create their own books, sell them online, and build audiences without any editor's approval. Some artists make more money from self-published rejected collections than from their mainstream work. The overhead is minimal, and the creative freedom is total. Social media groups and forums created communities around specific types of humor. Dark comedy groups, surreal meme pages, niche hobby forums, they all need visual content. A cartoon rejected for being too specific might be perfect for a group of accountants or dog groomers who get the inside joke. YouTube channels about art and creativity often feature rejected work. Artists share their portfolios, including the pieces that didn't make it. These videos get millions of views because people are fascinated by the creative process, especially the messy parts that usually stay hidden. The gaming industry discovered that cartoonists' rejected work often translates perfectly into game art, merchandise, and promotional materials. Gaming audiences appreciate irreverent, boundary-pushing humor that traditional publications shy away from. International markets opened up too. A cartoon too American for European publications might be too European for American ones, but online platforms don't have geographic limitations. Artists found global audiences for work that seemed too culturally specific for their local editors. And the weird part is that today's editors are starting to pay attention to what succeeds in these alternative spaces. They're realizing that their idea of too risky might actually be exactly what audiences want. The line between mainstream and alternative keeps shifting, usually toward the previously rejected side. The rejection that once meant creative death now often means creative opportunity. Every no from a traditional outlet potentially opens doors to platforms hungry for exactly that kind of content. What happens when artists fully embrace this shift and stop trying to please the gatekeepers entirely? Every no is a stepping stone disguised as a roadblock. That's the secret most people miss when they're staring at their rejection pile, wondering if they should give up or keep going. The cartoonists who've made it through thousands of rejections know something the rest of us don't. Each no carries invisible instructions for improvement. Take Matthew Duffy, who turned his own mountain of rejections into a publishing empire. He didn't just collect other people's rejected cartoons for fun, he studied patterns. What made editors cringe? What crossed invisible lines? What felt too safe or too wild? Every rejection became research data, teaching him how to crack the code of what actually sells. The weird part is how rejection sharpens artistic vision faster than acceptance ever could. When Bob Mankoff was collecting his first 1,000 rejections from The New Yorker, he wasn't just getting told no, he was getting a masterclass in editorial standards. Each rejection forced him to dig deeper, push harder, and find angles nobody else was exploring. Makes sense, right? Success might make you comfortable, but rejection makes you better. Then there's the transformation that happens when artists stop fearing rejection and start embracing it. Roz Chast openly shares her rejected work now, turning failed submissions into social media gold. What once felt like professional embarrassment becomes proof of creative courage. Those rejected cartoons show her willing to take risks, to push boundaries that safer artists wouldn't dare approach. But here's where things get really interesting. Some of today's most successful cartoonists deliberately create work they know will get rejected, just to stay sharp. They'll spend Monday drawing commercial-friendly cartoons for editors, then spend Tuesday creating wild, unmarketable stuff for their own growth. The rejection becomes part of their training routine, like a boxer practicing with weights before the real fight. Let's not forget how digital platforms completely changed the rejection game. A cartoon too edgy for The New Yorker might explode on Instagram. Too weird for traditional magazines? Perfect for Reddit. The internet created infinite second chances for rejected work. Now artists can bypass traditional gatekeepers entirely, building audiences who actually prefer the stuff that got turned down. The numbers tell an incredible story about persistence paying off. Cartoonists who eventually break into major publications average about 2,000 rejections first. That's not a typo. 2,000 times hearing no before landing consistent work. Well, what separates the survivors from the quitters isn't talent alone. It's treating each rejection like valuable market research instead of personal failure. And the weird psychology of it all? Some artists report their best ideas come immediately after crushing rejections. Something about having your work dismissed forces creative rebellion. The brain starts generating ideas specifically designed to prove the rejecter wrong. It's like rejection becomes rocket fuel for innovation. Modern success stories are filled with artists who celebrate their reject piles as much as their published work. They frame their first rejection letters. They throw rejection parties. They've turned professional disappointment into a badge of honor, proof they're pushing boundaries instead of playing it safe. The business side reveals another truth about turning no into yes. Smart cartoonists track their rejection patterns like stock market analysts, which jokes get rejected everywhere, which ones get close but not quite responses, which subjects are editorial poison right now. This data helps them time their submissions better, knowing when to push boundaries and when to play it safer. Current publishing trends show editors becoming hungrier for work that stands out from the crowd. The same cartoons that got rejected for being too unusual 5 years ago are exactly what magazines want now. Yesterday's too weird becomes today's refreshingly original. Artists who kept their rejected work suddenly have a treasure chest of ahead-of-their-time material ready to go. Professional development happens faster through rejection than through success. Getting accepted feels great but teaches little. Getting rejected forces artists to analyze, adapt, and evolve. The cartoonists who emerge from rejection gauntlets are typically stronger, more versatile, and more market-aware than those who succeeded immediately. The community aspect can't be ignored either. Artists sharing their rejection stories create networks of mutual support and learning. Online groups dedicated to creative rejection have become goldmines of practical advice. Members share which editors prefer what styles, which publications are changing direction, which jokes are overdone. Collective rejection wisdom helps everyone improve faster. Peak performance often emerges from the pressure of repeated rejection. When comfortable success isn't an option, artists dig deeper into their creative reserves. They experiment more boldly. They develop distinctive voices instead of copying what's already working. Desperation breeds innovation in ways comfort never could. The path forward isn't about avoiding rejection, it's about getting better at using it. Every no contains information about markets, audiences, and opportunities. Smart artists decode these messages instead of just feeling hurt by them. Success isn't the opposite of rejection, it's what rejection teaches you to build.